Bealach and Corp winds around Ben Ledi and over to St Bride's Church. Like all coffin roads, it's not an easy road. It isn't supposed to be. Its twists and turns are meant to confuse, to disorientate. Not the mourners, you understand, but the spirits of those in the carried coffins. It wouldn't do to have a poor soul decide to find its way back home. And of course, there are other sorts of spirits to be found on roads such as these. Or so I'm told. I think it would take more than spirits to startle me these days. It would need to be noisy spirits too. I'm deaf in one ear now, and the other just rings all the time. Silence. That's what would startle me. A moment of quiet. Even here, up amongst the hills around Callander, the bells always ring in my ear, echoing round my head. The air's certainly better though, away from the smoke and rubble of the towns. Even though it's over, the war is still everywhere to be seen. It will be for years yet. I was glad of a reason to leave town. I haven't settled since we got back, even after a year. With our home in Bethnal Green gone, there was no bed I could sleep in, no company I could keep. Always just the memories and the bells. I had a friend in the military, Atkins, who took pity on me more than anything. He said he'd found me a mission, something that could use my talents, as if we were back surveying in Belgium. Next war will be different, he said, just like that, as if we all hadn't just spent 6 years dying. Top brass think we'll need rocket launch pads in places off the beaten track, out in the hills and countryside. Need you to do some scoping out for us up in Scotland. Well paid, your pick of the best bed and breakfasts, and all the fresh air and exercise you could need. You can start to put all this behind you. Maybe even start again. Start again? It seemed inconceivable. I was stuck and felt sure I would stay stuck until after the inquiry had been completed, until the truth of the disaster was made plain, if ever it would be. It wasn't Atkins' place to comment on such matters. Couldn't even if he wanted to. It was a kind offer though, and so I took it in the spirit in which it was intended. To be honest, I'm still not sure he didn't just send me off politely on a wild goose chase to keep me out of the way. Still, I take my measurement and photos, mark off the maps, and post them down at the end of each week. It's up to the men in suits what happens next. Though it would be a shame to spoil the hills with bombs and rockets. Surely no good can come of that. No good at all. I sometimes wonder that we take our relationship with the land for granted. Cutting, ripping, digging. It's in places such as these that the land cuts back, is more ready to defend itself, or to simply just exist in its own raw glory without concern or regard for us. The corpse roads respect the landscape, clinging to the edges of bogs and winding through empty valleys, crisscrossing rivers. To call them roads, though, is almost to diminish them, to rob them of the part which is most difficult to explain. These are not roads, they are ways. Ways of getting from one place to another. A narrow thread weaving between well-tilled fields that coffins must not cross, and hills higher than mourners can clamber. Surveying, you come to recognise the feel of these places in between, or at least I do. Stairwells on the underground, randomly untouched houses and streets bombed to rubble, or the edge of the countryside, where trees give way to streets and houses, and older places, where you may find waymarkers and boundary stones to help draw invisible lines across the land. Since the war, I've found a similar sensation to be found in those sleepless hours, when the rest of the world lies silent, and I sit, open-eyed in the dark, the endless bells chiming in the dawn. And this is how I felt when I first walked through Bealach and Corp. But there was something else around those frayed edges that called to some primal part of me to be ready, be aware. A feeling I remembered from the days of running for cover. I reasoned at first that this was because I was alone with dusk approaching, but I quickly realised that I was uneasy precisely because I did not feel alone. The ground was hard with frost, and so I could clearly hear the crunch of boots on the ground. No matter which direction I turned to, There was no one to be seen. But still, the boots crunched. Of course, I knew that hills and valleys could distort sounds, making things seem nearer than they actually were, so I called out a greeting to whoever was nearby. There was no reply, or at least no reply from another voice, for instead there was a crack and a splash. I turned towards a nearby loch I had noted on the right of the path, fearing I might see my mysterious fellow traveller struggling in the icy water. But the loch was still and frozen. Beyond it, though, at the top of the hill, there was a light. It seems strange to report, but somehow the presence of that light in the empty valley somehow made the day seem darker, as if, rather than illuminating the darkness, it was drawing attention to it. The light swayed and shifted, and I could not yet make out who held it. There were voices now too, as if off at a great distance, calling out, screaming. And then, a voice I recognised too well, singing in time with the bells. It's a lovely day tomorrow, tomorrow is a lovely day. I knew what this was. I'd felt this before as butterflies turned to bats in my chest, and so I'm not ashamed to say I ran down from the hill and made swiftly to the inn where I was staying, trying to outstep the darkness, moving as quickly as I could until the voices were gone and only the familiar ringing remained. I've learned these last years that it's better to talk about what you fear, to give it form and shape that you can understand. And from my many years of surveying, I also know the best way to solve a mystery is usually to speak to a local. So I shared my experience with the innkeeper that night after dinner. Small wonder, he said. There's probably as many people died up in that road as there were ever carried along it in coffins. Really? How so? Oh, there was an accident there, back in the 1850s or thereabouts. A funeral party got lost on the way to St Bride's, well over 100 of them. Some say there was nearer 200, all walking the Coffin Road in midwinter. It wasn't dark when they set out, but they had torches with them all the same, all these lights weaving slowly round the hills. It had been a cold few days, but as they're at the pass, the snow started. You've seen what it's like up there. It's easy enough to lose your way when you can see where you're going. And whoever was at the head of the funeral party, well, they took a wrong turn and led them all out across the frozen loch. It took a moment or two for them to notice. Then they heard this first crack of the ice. Everyone panicked, scrambled and ran, and of course the ice shattered, all the quicker, taking them all right down into the depths. The loch up there. I stood across from it today. It's surely never big enough for over 100 people to fall into. Well, it's deeper than it looks. They never recovered all the bodies, though. The snow had come in fierce and it didn't clear for days. It took about that long for people to realise the funeral party had never made it through the pass. It was almost a week before people were able to get up and look. In between times, the lake had frozen back over. Some of the poor souls had floated back up to the top, and there were all these dead hands reaching up out of the ice when it froze again. And the animals had been chewing at them. Drowned faces, too, peering up at you from below. They had to take picks and hammers to the ice to smash through and drag them up. Even then, there was only so much they could do. The loch didn't thaw properly till the spring. They never found so much as a splinter of the coffin. That's dreadful, I said. So, you think I was hearing spirits today, then? You'll know better than I what you heard, but people do say they hear the cries for help echoing across the loch. We've had a few folks since then just wander off the path and end up dead in the loch themselves. Some will tell you that's because they saw the lights of the funeral party and felt compelled to follow them through the pass, straight down into the loch and onto the hereafter. There were lights on the hill tonight. Oh, there's been lights flickering round those hills and fields since long before a funeral party disappeared. I nodded. I'd certainly read plenty about this phenomena before. Will-o'-the-wisps and magic lanterns. It could well be these are just part of the natural order of things in a way that we don't yet understand. Well, it could be. But that's not what I meant. I've had many folk in here tell me similar stories to yours, and I've come around to thinking that it's not just the spirits of those in the coffin roads up there. Places like that, they pull spirits towards them. Or there's those who have loved ones that are just following them about. And when they're there, they get lost in the winding paths. I'd say half the ghosts up there are those that people brought with them. If you're surveying again tomorrow, I'd make sure you're done before dark. I took him at his word. And so, here I am, back at the pass, waiting for the darkness. Only this time, I know what to expect. Snow has started to fall, thick and fast. My breath freezes on the air. My fingers are numb, and just as I think I might give up, I hear the cracking of boots on the frost. This time, I see them more clearly. Grey shapes through the blizzard, walking out across the ice. It begins, the screaming, the cries for help. I turn away. There are others too now, passing by me on the road, lost in the snow, wandering the coffin road, trying to find a way home, and finally, I see her, as I knew I would. And she smiles, just as she did in the days before the war, before I left her to the raids and the chaos. I hear the crying and screaming again, and it may be the funeral party out upon the ice, or the women and children trampled and dying on the bomb shelter stairway. It almost does not matter. She carries a torch to light my way safely, and I follow her. My boots crunch on the frozen ground as I step from the land onto the loch. And then the bells stop ringing. Instead, there's only her voice, singing the song from the day I marched away. If today your heart is weary, if every little thing looks grey, then just forget your troubles and learn to say, tomorrow is a lovely day. She stops. Finally, there is quiet. No screaming, no singing, no bells. Her cold hand reaches out for me, and she draws me slowly into that silence. Historical note. Lachlan na Corp, the small loch of the bodies, is said to be the site of a disaster for the Kesson family of Callander, in which an entire funeral procession lost their lives sometime in the 19th century. On 3rd March 1943, an air raid siren sounded, and hundreds ran to the nearby underground station at Bethnal Green. The site had not been properly prepared as a bomb shelter, and in the ensuing panic, 173 people were crushed or suffocated on the stairs. In fact, the siren had been a false alarm, triggered by the testing of anti-aircraft guns in Victoria Park. This fact was kept secret from the public for years afterwards, so as not to damage morale.